I'm just making a video, dogs. It's all right. So, I'm going to sort of derail a little bit from the what to do with the rich people thing, because I'm going to get back to that at some point, because I need to talk about the method, because I have some ideas there on how you can go about doing that. And even if you aren't successful in it, good data you can gather so you can learn how to replicate it. So I have some ideas there, and I'll get into that at some other point. But before I get into that, I want to start with some so I want to sit at the edges of what I'm understanding too, but there's also this cool sort of like exciting thing that's happening, and I'm kind of enthusiastic about this because getting into it sort of getting me amped, which is odd because I'm actually very low in enthusiasm. I think I'm for my Big Five aspect. If you aren't familiar with Big Five aspect, I'm going to get in that at some point, the method, because I think that's involved in trying to figure out how to get people to get happy. But Big Five aspect is just like think a Myers-Briggs personality test, but it actually has some scientific credibility. It's not perfect, but you know what is. So I'm not very enthusiastic. I'm something like 21st percentile, which means if there's a room of 100 people, chances are I'm less enthusiastic than 78 of them, right? So I don't really get enthused very often. So doing this stuff, it's been weird to feel it because it almost feels like I've accidentally been solving a problem that I didn't even realize I was solving or working on. And what I mean by that is when I'm thinking about these things in particular, and it doesn't mean everything that I think about, because like, for example, I think my thoughts on abortion, though, I think those still need some work, right? Because I think there's some weirdness there. So I don't think that's not really necessarily all snapped into place. But when I'm thinking about this stuff, it's like every time I run into a new question, it's just I get an answer and it snaps into place. So it's almost like I've been building this big long chain of dominoes for like the past 40 years, didn't even realize it, and now I'm like just starting to knock them over because everything new that comes up is just like tick 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 tick, and they all just keep going and going. So that's really cool. It's actually a lot of fun. It's pretty exciting because every time, like I said, man, every time I run into a new question, you know, like even when I was talking about last time, you know, what do we do with the rich people? Like my brain already started to fill with exactly how you go through it, exactly how you document it. So, but before I get into all that other stuff, I want to talk about some of the sort of presuppositions I'm working with here, sort of like part of the mission statement. So, the money, the why to give people money, and whether or not UBI is coming or is coming, or rather is coming or is not coming, and what that actually means. I don't think it really matters. I think giving people an income is the right thing to do, and I'm going to explain why. So, money isn't the source of the happiness, right? Being able to get the resources to get the stuff is not the source of happiness. So it's really important to understand that, because like I said, that's part of why I want to get rich people. That's why they make such a perfect test candidate, right? Because they already have all the resources. Clearly that's not the thing that solves it. So how do we turn them into somebody that's happy? So the reason I want to do that is because really what I'm trying to do here, when I'm thinking about this stuff, is I'm not trying to figure out how to eliminate suffering. That's a really important thing to understand. Eliminating suffering is not the point at all. You can't eliminate suffering, I don't think, and nor do I think you should eliminate suffering. So the point isn't to make people not suffer. That's not why you want to give them the money. No, the reason you want to give them the money is because, like I said, dealing with human beings like this in social engineering, it's an engineering problem, right? So if you think of people, and you think of trying to modify and tweak people to be the best possible versions of themselves they kind of be, you can kind of think of it in the same way of like building a rocket ship, right? So if you're going to build a rocket ship, there's a lot of precision mechanical work that has to go into place, and one of the chief things you have to be concerned about is drag, right? Because if the rocket's going to go up and it's going to achieve enough horizontal thrust that it can actually break the atmosphere, you want to have the drag eliminated as much as possible. So the reason I want to get people the money is not because I want to eliminate their suffering in regard to not necessarily being able to have stuff. What I want to do is I want to eliminate the drag on them figuring out how to be the best idealized versions of themselves. So if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, right? If so much of your energy is dedicated to solving the problems down at this bottom base of the pyramid and then this middle base of the pyramid, it's very hard to get to the top of the pyramid, which is where you actually want to do your most important work. You know, it's that little tip at the top. That's where you actually sort of like become your human version of a rocket ship. So if you're having to dedicate so much energy to just trying to figure out how to fulfill the bottom part. It's that you don't have enough energy necessarily to worry about the top part. So if money isn't what's going to solve the suffering for people, and money's not the thing you want, meaning is the thing you want people to be able to focus on meaning to the maximal level that they possibly can. So there's a potential flaw in this. So it might be that people focusing on the Maslow portion of the hierarchy, that potentially that's active training for building up the muscles to actually being able to sort of achieve this top end layer. So, just like when you go to the gym and you start working out, right? You don't start with like bench pressing 300 pounds, you start with like, depending on how weak you are, maybe you start with the bar. And, maybe that's what fulfilling Maslow is. Maybe that's just figuring out how to get a job so you can buy the food and so you can pay the bill. Maybe that's like an integral part of your training to becoming like the hero aspect of yourself. That's possible. But I don't think it is. I actually don't. I don't think that's necessary, because I think, like I said, the money isn't the problem, right? So the suffering is going to be in place no matter what. So figuring out how to deal with the suffering is going to be a problem no matter what, I think. Maybe. But it's something that, and this is sort of like another presupposition of this, right? Because the goal of this is not to make a manifesto and send it out to the world and say, this is how we need to change everything, because that's dumb. You don't do that, right? You don't just come up with this theory, an idea of how everything's supposed to be, and then get it out to the world and say, look, I figured out life. That's idiotic. What you do is you figure out small little independent steps of it, which again goes back to why I want to start with the rich people, because that's an easy control group that you can figure out. Because maybe the assertions I have about how this works and how you can get rich people to sort of like find meaning and get a purpose and find this sort of fulfillment, maybe I'm wrong about that. I might go about trying to find getting these people into something that they have meaning, and maybe it's like it provides completely the opposite result to what I was expecting. That's entirely possible. That may happen. I don't know. Right? So you don't just want to assume that like, hey guys, I figured out exactly what the problem was just by sitting here and think about it, because gosh, aren't I smart? That's an idiotic thing to do, right? So you want to actually test your theory out to see whether or not it's accurate. One of the chief things that social disciplines want to do, when the good social disciplines, mind you, which there aren't a lot, but they exist. The good social disciplines, one of the things that they do whenever they're going to do some sort of social experiment is they want to be sure, the right ideal of how to do a social experiment is to have enough of the resources dedicated to doing the social experiment, and also having enough resources to do a follow-up study of the results of the social experiment. Because you don't just want to say, do a UBI study and say, we gave people this money and here's how they sort of live their life. You also want to sort of like revisit how that actually affected their life, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line. So, presupposition I have about how this should function. I want to try to figure out if there's a way that we can maintain production so we can fulfill Maslow, right? But I think Maslow provides more drag on building the rocket ship than is necessary, and I think it actually causes a lot of rockets to break up on trying to exit the atmosphere. So why does that matter? It matters because of the hero theory, right? You want everybody to try to figure out the maximal way that they can find out how to be productive and fulfill through that production. And just so you understand, I don't mean that they're going to be happy all the time. That's not what I'm talking about here. I mean, they're not just going to find the thing they want to do. Like for anybody out there that's actually encountered something they want to do and they run into it and they do it and they think, haha, great, I achieved. So that means never again a bad day. No, that's not what that means. That means never again am I going to feel pain or misery and I'm going to be happy every single day of my life. No, that's not what that means. It means that if you're feeling happiness as a result of what you're doing, that's sort of like an indicator that potentially you're on the right track, right? And if you can manage to get more of the happiness over a basis that is higher than the happiness you used to get prior to that, it's the happiness is an indicator that you're doing the right thing. It's more like a little that you get on a Geiger counter, right? So the happiness isn't necessarily the goal. The happiness is the indicator that you're doing the right thing, to some extent. So, the presupposition of the whole theory, this is what it is that the most sovereign, important thing is the individual. It's for you, it's you, and for me, it's me, right? That's the most important thing. We want to figure out how to make our lives as good as we possibly can. That's the most important thing. Right, Chris? Isn't that the most important thing? You gonna tell him? Are you gonna let him do that? Are you gonna let him get away with that? So, the individual is the most important thing. So, now what does that mean? So, as an individual, you're architected through evolution across the span of years. You're not architected to necessarily be happy. You're architected to try to avoid threat, to try to avoid danger. That's what you're architected for. So you want to avoid suffering. You want to avoid misery. That's what your primary design is. Your primary design is not to be happy. So don't get that mistaken. Your primary design is to avoid suffering. But one of the ways that you'll know you're successfully avoiding suffering is that at times you will feel more happy, right? So it's an indicator. It's not the purpose. It's not what you're designed for. You're designed to try to figure out how to avoid the suffering. So, presupposition is most important thing is the individual figuring out how to eliminate and reduce their suffering. Now, as individuals, in the complex society we have, the more people that are out there doing more things that are more beneficial for society in pursuit of trying to, realize their own self-interests, the better your life, my life, will become. Because did you invent air conditioning? Right? Did you? Did you invent personal computers? Did you invent satellites and GPS? No. But those things are really good to your individual life. So you want to try to maximize the amount of people that can actually pursue their individual interests, because the more people that are capable of pursuing their individual interests, the more people that are going to provide services and great things that you can utilize in the pursuit of your own self-interest. That's the presupposition. That's what sort of like the cornerstone of this idea is. That's how it works. And something else that's also interesting about this, and one of the things that I've been getting sort of enthusiastic about, what I've been thinking about, which kind of goes back a little bit to the conversation of, does God exist, does God not exist? So, going back to thinking about the science of capitalism versus socialism, right? And that capitalism is scientifically better because you can drop people inside of capitalism and they don't starve and have as many negative experiences as they do as if you drop people in socialism, right? So capitalism is sort of like scientifically proven to be better, but there's something really interesting that means. And this is what actually got me so enthusiastic thinking about this today. It's not that we figured out a new clever rule set. It is kind of, but it's not that we manifested a rule, I don't think. I think it's we discovered an already existing rule. Think about that for a minute, right? Because we figured out capitalism and the idea of Western civilization and the sovereign individual, and it turned out that when we dropped people in that, the world became a better place because of it. So the question is, did the world become a better place because we made the system and made everybody adhere to it? Or did the world become a better place because we obeyed nature and thus were able to command it? I think the rule already existed. I think the rules already existed for millions of years before we even thought of them. This idea of the sovereign individual that made Western democracy function in regard with human beings, I think we discovered a law. I don't think we made one. I think we discovered one. And that's really different, isn't it? That's a whole lot different than you just made a rule and now people agreed to it. It's like, no, you found a rule that already existed for millennia. Like, think about that for a minute. That means there is a right way to do things with people. It means it's just like every other scientific discovery that we've made. It's just like figuring out how gravity works. It's exactly like figuring out how electricity works and making microchips. There's already a set of things we can do to maximize who we are as individuals. We just don't know them yet, but they're already there. We don't have to make them up. We just have to find them. And that's completely different. And that's what sort of got me amped up, because that's a really cool way to consider it. And it also gives some, potentially, some credibility to the people that talk about the existence of God and whatnot, because it's like, maybe there is already a divine plan for what we're supposed to be doing that we just don't know and we're figuring out as we go. That's really interesting. So, I don't know, I thought that was cool when I realized that. And I'd sort of like toyed with that idea and thought about it before, but it really like sort of crystallized for me today when I was thinking about it. That like, holy shit, we didn't just make up something and make everybody do it. No, we figured out a fundamental principle of how human beings operate as universal entities, and we learned to obey that rule, and that's why we have Western civilization, because we learned to operate by the rules that had already existed, which is awesome. I thought I had made that thing turn on forever. I just made the other ones turn on forever. Look at that. It's a sham. It's a sham. Right. Uh-huh. Interesting. I'll just keep getting up and walking. At least I'm not staring at my own nose the whole time this time. Consequently, I noticed some of like these things are getting like 7 views, which seems crazy to me. Like there aren't actually 6 other of you out there other than me watching these whole things, right? You're just sort of like, I subscribe to them, so I'm gonna click on them and like watch these for a second, realize it's too quiet and that irritates me, so I'm not actually gonna watch it. There's no way people are just sitting here listening to me ramble for 45 minutes. But maybe they are. I don't know. But that seems unlikely. So that's the presupposition. The individual is the thing we need to worry about the most. And if the individual is the thing we need to worry about the most, we need to try to make sure that all individuals can achieve their maximal capacity, because the more individuals that can achieve their maximal capacity, the more individuals that can achieve, can contribute great things to all of society, which contributes great things to our individual interests. That's why we should pursue the system. And the reason you want to give people money is not so you can eliminate their suffering. The reason you want to give people money is so you can eliminate the drag on them trying to actually break atmosphere in regard to becoming the optimal human being that can contribute to society, that can contribute to your individual interests. I think that's sort of like the idea I'm working with here. And again, it's not come up with an idea, write Das Kapital and send it out to everybody and watch millions of people die. That's not the plan, because that's a stupid plan. That went a lot faster than I thought it would. Well, so I guess I can talk about some of the method that I've been thinking about. So, like I said, I'm a 21st percentile in enthusiasm. I'm like 76th, 78th percentile in neuroticism, something like that. 96th in openness to experience, 98th in just straight openness. So what I think part of the beginning of the methodology for getting the useless rich people or the unfulfilled rich people will be mapping what their big 5 is. So, like I said, it's not yet a perfect sort of measurement. There are problems and inconsistencies with it, but it's the best one we have so far. So much like Western democracy, let's not just burn the whole house down. Let's use what we got, right? So I think the first step involves actually putting people, having people sort of like take that comparative analysis so they can find out what their actual traits are. Because I think, and I may be wrong on this, this is something I'll probably find out if I actually do this and get the opportunity to do it. I think someone's Big 5 aspect scale is, it's not necessarily going to tell you what job specifically they should find or what things specifically they should do, though you can actually use it as sort of like a barometer. So let's say, for example, industriousness. So industriousness is one of the Big 5 aspect scales for how into doing work you are, how productive you are. So that's important to understand, because if you're I'm itching you, Pris, relax. One of the things that's important to understand is if you're high in industrious, let's say you're 81st in industriousness, that means you're more industriousness than 81 people out of 100, right? That's something important to know, because what that means, that has an indication that one of the things you need in order to feel like you're not suffering and to feel like you have any sort of contentment is you need to be working. Right? See, not everybody needs that. Not everybody needs that to feel some sort of fulfillment. Like, for me, for example, I'm 96th percentile in openness to experience, which means out of 100 people, I'm more sort of like creatively minded than 95, 96 out of 100, right? So that means in order for me to be happy, I need to find something to do where I'm getting to sort of utilize that creative aspect of myself, because that's a very important and intrinsic thing to me. Move it. Beat it. I already gave you itches. Let's go over there. So I think that'll be the first step, is have them take their Big Five aspects so we can find out what we're dealing with. And I think it might not also be a bad idea to try to do a survey of people. Try to see if you can do a broad scale survey. Chris, knock it off. I'm talking over here. Why are you looking at me like that? Yeah, you're a good girl. So if possible, do a large scale survey. And what you want to look for in this survey is you want to look for people that report extremely high fulfillment in their life, extremely high fulfillment in their work, in their personal life. Find people that are as fulfilled as you can possibly find through a survey. And then through these people, you start to map what it is they do for a living, what their family life is like, whether or not they're married, whether or not they're single, if they have kids, how many, how close their ties to their family are, what sort of industry they're involved in. So you can start to build a matrices of people that have achieved this sort of like maximum productivity, this maximum efficiency, this maximum satisfaction. Find out what it is they do. And like I said, it's not necessarily going to be a one-to-one ratio. So it doesn't mean that somebody that has exact matching metrics to their Big Five aspect scale, that they're going to have the exact same predilections. That's not what it means. But it gives you a starting point, right? It gives you something that you can look at and say, okay, so these are what your sort of like intrinsic traits are. And you can change them over time if you work on it, right? But these are what your intrinsic traits are to start with. So we found people that have mapping either identical to yours or similar to yours, people that had managed to find complete fulfillment, these are the things they did. This is what their family life looked like. So when we say these things to you, like, the person had been, a virgin until they got married. And then they got married and they had 2 kids exactly. And that person was also worked in computer chip manufacturing, right? So if you can say, these are the things we noticed of people that have skills similar to yours, what does this life sound like to you? Does this life sound good? Does this life sound bad? And my hypothesis is that the more data you manage to aggregate on that for people that are actually blissful inside of their life, and not necessarily blissful 100% of the time. Like I said, happiness is like a Geiger counter indicator. It's not the actual goal. The goal is to not suffer, but the way you not suffer is find meaning. And if you find meaning, you will, as a consequence, oftentimes find a lot of happiness. So if you can do this comparative analysis and you can go down the list of these things and say, does this life sound like a life you're interested in? And my hypothesis here is that oftentimes they will say, yeah, that sounds great. And maybe they won't, but that's something we're going to have to find out. So, but I think getting a survey so you can start to build that matrices, because it's an engineering problem. That means we can figure it out. We can. We just haven't yet. We don't know how to yet, but we can. We can figure it out. And there's not a point where more data is going to be a bad thing, right? Oftentimes the problem I see with a lot of studies that I read is that their data is insufficient. Like I see this happen all the time when people are using Bayesian philosophical models to try to figure out what the answer is to something, because Bayesian philosophical models, they depend on whether or not you actually found all the right data. And if you interject 1 or 2 radically different pieces of data, it can radically change and alter the answer. So I'm not a big fan of the Bayesian method, but maybe I'm wrong on that because I don't understand enough. But yeah, so I think you want to survey a bunch of people, find out people who are actually really happy, take some sort of like different biometric measurements on them. What's their Big Five? What's their IQ? What was their upbringing? Where were they raised? Start seeing where you can mix and match these things with different people that you're talking with, and see how accurately you can match what a person is that you're talking to and what their Big Five scale is to other people that you've mapped and have their Big Five, but these are also people that they feel like they've achieved their dream in life, and see whether or not you can find some commonalities and like goals or targets to give these people to aim for. So I think that might be a good way to, and even if that doesn't solve it, even if that doesn't give you, all the right answers that you wanted necessarily, even if that doesn't produce the result you were expecting, it gives you a starting point, right? And I think that's a reasonable starting point. I think it's a reasonable sort of starting point. I already said it. So one of the things I'd be curious to understand is whether or not we've actually already started to aggregate that data at all. I wonder if there actually has been any sort of matrix that's been made of those things. I haven't seen one, and I sort of make a habit of not as much as I should probably, but I make some habit of following scientific journals and recent psychological findings and things of that nature. Like I keep up on that more than the average bear. How's that? Not necessarily more than the average clinical psychologist, but more than the average person. And I haven't seen anything where somebody's done like something like that, just to gather raw data. I often wonder if that's a flaw in our scientific process, that we explicitly only start scientific research in regard to a hypothesis. Maybe we should just start aggregating a shit ton of data for no reason other than to have all the data, but then it's what data do you get, because the data you can get is infinite, right? So I understand the method. You gonna take that, Bruce? You gonna take that? Yeah, you gonna take it? All right. So, part of why I'm documenting all this is going to be absurdly egocentric, which is fine, but I'm doing it more because it's a good method for trying to do it. But something I think would be cool, actually, is let's say, by some sheer amount of dumb luck and effort, I do manage to figure out a better way to help people figure out their actual meaning in life, and it does provide a better result for society at large. Let's say I manage to do that. Long shot, but let's say I manage. Wouldn't it be cool to watch the person that figured that out just go through the whole process and figure it out? Like, how cool would it be if you could just watch, like, 200 hours of Einstein talking to himself while he's figuring out relativity? And again, not saying I'm Einstein. Let's drop that. But how cool would that be if you could do that? If you could watch him actually working through it? Like, I would just sit there and watch the whole thing, dude. Like, I'd binge it. Are you kidding me? I think that'd be awesome. So just in case, by some dumb luck and effort, I do manage to figure this out, and somebody later is watching this as a case study, and this is how he got there. Hi, how you doing? You're pretty cool. You're watching me. You gotta be cool. Kidding. Like how cool would it be if you could watch Tesla just talking about working on Tesla stuff? How cool would that be? That'd be so badass. But yeah, man, this is genuinely exciting for me, because, like I said, as I'm going through, when you're working on something, what you're supposed to do next and the intricacies and complexities of it can often take you by surprise, and you can't necessarily know what you're going to do. But like I said, man, it's just like fucking dominoes. Like, every question I have 3 different answers, and I know how they all join together, and I know what makes sense, and I know what to do with them. And it's like, seriously, it's like I was aiming at a target I didn't even realize I was aiming at, and now that I've actually seen it, I'm like, yep, that's it. And I just, in my head at least, I feel like I'm hitting it. It doesn't mean I am hitting it at all, but in my head I feel like I'm hitting it. That's a odd feeling. It's very odd. It's cool though. It's cool as hell. There they go. There they go. So, again, this doesn't solve any of the production problem for anything, right? But I think it, because I was actually kind of thinking about that too. Like, oh yeah? Then what happened? I was actually thinking about the production problem, because that's something that's not immediately obvious to me. Because also, like I said, I'm not an economics expert by any stretch of the imagination, and it's also, I'm not sure the solution to that portion of this is something that's been tried in any fashion. which is hard to say for sure because I don't necessarily know what the question is or what the answer there is, so I don't know whether or not it has or hasn't been tried, because that is one place I actually am at a loss in all this. One thing I considered is whether or not, as part of the sort of like an initial early portion of a person's life up to like say 25, that you actually have them assigned to work that is work that's needed to be done, and it's done as like a short term, sort of like a compulsory military thing. But there are a lot of problems with that idea. One, it means you have to actually maintain a certain amount of like birthing people versus elderly, which is in and of itself a problem. There's a lot of problems with doing that, with doing a compulsory work system. But I don't know, because we kind of already have a compulsory work system right now, don't we? And it's not necessarily the thing you want. But you know, it's something that's also about this and people finding what it is they're supposed to do. I don't think the consequence and the output and the result will be everybody finding the one thing they're supposed to do for the rest of their life. Because I think there are some people that's not the right answer at all. I think there are some people that should dedicate their lives to being jacks of all trades, and I think those people have their own particular merit inside of a system, right? If you have somebody that's done, like say you're working on a video game, right? For example, since that's sort of like my field now. If you have somebody that's been a designer, been a programmer, and been an artist, and they were decent or passable at all of them, like that they have that very toolkit has its own sort of like benefits to it, right? So I don't think people will necessarily find the one thing that they're supposed to do forever, which I think is part of the problem with the career ideology, right? Because I think some people are best utilized not in a career. I think some people are best utilized learning a lot of different things from different areas and then being injected into different things, so they have all this multifaceted perspective about all the different things that could impact or change those different attributes of the project for the better. And I think that's its own skill set. I think that's its own sort of like paradigm, and I think that has value and merit. So I don't necessarily, like I said, think that the output of this will be, okay, we're going to find the one thing you're going to do forever, and that's going to be it. We might find that some people, based on their different predilections and preferences, shouldn't just do one thing forever. And that's actually good, and that's actually good for us. You know, that's good for the individual that's selfish, because they do all these other different things, and they go to do this thing where they're working on a project with, like, you know, SpaceX or whatever, and it turns out that because of their unique perspective, they can figure out some different things that are actually relevant to, you know, space travel. No, you don't want that, Chris. You don't want that. So I don't think we're necessarily going to get one-to-one matches on what people should do. But I think we can get eventually, probably not in my lifetime, but I think eventually we could get one-to-one matches, roughly speaking, or close to it, approximate thereof, of a plan for what a person should do, and whether it should be 1, or maybe 2, or maybe 8. No more. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. Here, I'll show you Pris again. There's Pris again. Hey, Pris. You wagging your tail at me? Maybe she's wagging her tail at me. That's bullshit cheap trick, and you know it, dog. You're a good girl. So, some of the method. Some of the method is actually getting people to take their big 5 aspects, so you have an idea. Because you know if you're a rich person and you're spending all your time going to parties, doing whatever, just doing nonsense, right? You're trying to do that to find fulfillment, but it turns out that you're like a 96th percentile in industriousness. Well, no wonder you're miserable. You're supposed to be working like all the time, or else you're not going to be happy. That's an important thing to know. That's an important thing to understand about yourself. You know, if you're someone that's a 10th percentile in openness, maybe you shouldn't be trying to be a graphic artist. Maybe that's part of why you're miserable, right? That's important information to know. And I don't know it's going to be one-to-one, but I bet we're going to find some correlation if we look at it hard enough. So get the unhappy rich people, take their big 5 aspect, and also do large-scale surveys to try to figure out how fulfilled someone is in their life, where they are on a scale that you could rate in terms of fulfillment, if there is such a thing, and if not, you can make one, right? Find out where they are in that, the people that are in the top 10%. Figure out what their life looks like in correlation to their big five, and see if you can find any sort of like corollaries there. Because like I said, it's not unobvious that if you're 90th in industriousness, that you need to be productive all the time or you go crazy. Because there are people like that. Like, you know people like that. I know people like that. I'm just not one of those people, but I know people like that for sure. So I think that's at least a starting point of data to gather and comparative analysis to do. Now, as far as what they should be doing, again, potentially that survey will help you actually get at least some ideas to look at. It'll give you a starting point. It'll give you a place to look at and say, what do you think about this? Now, like I said, I'm pretty sure it'll be more complicated than that. That's why I was saying you have to be able to do it in 5 years, right? Because depending on the person, their home life, how good or bad things were, you could have a mountain of other shit you have to deal with too, right? Especially if like someone's high neuroticism like myself, and they've also had like a horrible youth experience. Like, there's some of that shit they're going to have to deal with to try to help them maximize. But you know, if you can actually get those people to maximize, and they are providing value, and you know, I'm not sure, honestly, how big of a problem the production thing's going to be. I'm genuinely not sure. And I'll tell you why. The reason why I'm not sure how big of a problem production is going to be, because if you run in my social circles, chances are you probably know some middle to upper middle class people, right? It's where only like the husband has to work and the wife gets to stay home and do whatever, or vice versa, as the case may be. How many, for lack of a better term, let's say bougie, how many bougie people do you know that all they think about is doing their little garden farm all day? You know, it's entirely possible that if people are sort of like given their druthers and they don't have to worry about whether or not they can keep the lights turned on, maybe what they want to do all day is farm. I think there's probably a lot of those people, honestly, more than you might think. I think there's a fair amount of those people. But I don't know for sure. Oh, and obviously as part of the data gathering, you have to do IQ gathering as well, because IQ is an important metric inside of that. Because the two things that are most indicative of whether or not you will be successful in our current government and economic system are your, in order of priority, your IQ, your fluid intelligence specifically, and your how hard you work, so your industriousness, which makes sense, right? Because you mean the smartest people that work the hardest are the ones that are the most successful? Right. Obviously. Obviously that's the case. So you would have to do an IQ check on it as well. You know, maybe even gathering the data to where you could accurately figure out how to take an unhappy rich person and make them happy. Like, just gathering the data where you can actually start to properly correlate that could take decades. But you know, I think that's also part of a problem we have in our society currently, in both government and in the sciences. I think too often people are worried about where they're making their mark and the thing they're going to be remembered for. You know, like you're a public official that gets in public office and you want to pass some legislation so you have a legacy that you can look back on. But you know, man, like, just gathering the right data, or starting to gather the right data, so someone 2 generations down the road can figure it out, that's a worthwhile legacy, and somebody needs to do that. But I don't know, maybe that's not a feasible thing. I don't know for sure. Good girl. Anyway, I don't feel like I have too much more to talk about right now, but it's pretty exciting. I'm actually enjoying this, and it's interesting. It really is interesting to me how much of this stuff it's just coming to me really naturally. Like, that was not sort of expected. I sort of like, you know, I was aiming for a different target. I was just trying to understand people so I could understand why my mom and dad said they loved one another, and then my neighbor, Michael Ariano, Semper Fi, if you're out there, Michael, his parents, when they said they loved one another, like they just looked completely different. The whole thing that got me into starting to understand this was just trying to understand that, really. That's really the whole thing I've been trying to figure out forever, but like this isn't even what I was aiming at when I've been doing the stuff that I've been doing for most of my life. I was just trying to understand, what does it mean to actually love somebody? What does that really mean? And how do you do that? Because apparently it seems like it's really hard to understand and figure out among people because they fuck it up all the time. I don't know. I think I need to plan out some more ideas of the method and then figure out some more of the charting, which is going to be difficult because I'm a 9 in orderliness. Ha! Funny story. You didn't know that, did you? Project manager that's 9 in orderliness. That's a paradox. Yeah, it's true. But I think I need to start actually taking some of this pen to paper, even though I hate doing that, as is my disposition. Yep, that's all I got for now. Bye.